That is, they will say, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just anti-Israel. I don't know if you've ever heard people say that. That's a very popular thing. I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just anti-Israel. So the question becomes then, as we're looking at anti-Semitism, how do you differentiate between the two? Because it is true, right? You can criticize Israel and not be an anti-Semite. Right? There were a lot of Israeli citizens who were criticizing Israel in the last few months before October 7th happened. And they were not anti-Semites. Right? Most of them were Jewish. So, here's the test. This is really important to note. This test is from Natan Sharansky, if you've ever heard of him. He put together what's referred to as the 3 Ds. 3 Ds are like this: demonization, delegitimization, and double standard. So demonization, delegitimization, and double standard. So if you find yourself, or if you find somebody else, doing any of those 3 things in regard to Israel, that is anti-Semitism. So you can come along and you can say, I don't like this policy that Israel has. I think it should have reform or whatnot, and that person's not an anti-Semite to say that. But if they say, Israel's just like the Nazis, right? That's demonization. Or you might have heard, Israel's an apartheid state, right? That's demonization, right? You're taking something in history that is clearly seen as wrong, as evil, and you're applying it to Israel. So that's demonization. Delegitimization means you say Israel has no right to exist. Right? Everybody else in the world, every other group can have nationalism and can have self-determination, but the Jews can't. Right? So that's delegitimization. Double standard is to say things like, well, every other country in the world can defend itself, Israel can't. Right? So that's the double standard. So any one of those 3 things, as soon as you start to do that, that then leads you from anti-Israel to anti-Semitism. Okay, I just want to say that before we get started because it's important to understand our definition here as we jump in. So let's take a look. Here's the plan. We're looking at anti-Semitism today. We're going to have 3 sections. The first is we're going to look at rising anti-Semitism, and we'll talk mainly about blatant anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism, that's pretty easy to look at and say, okay, yeah, that's bad, right? That's coming up, not a good thing. Now, I originally put this together for a non-Christadelphian audience. I often give talks on Jewish history or Israel history. So this part that I call subtle anti-Semitism, you might not feel like it's very subtle. But a lot of people do, right? And a lot of people struggle with this middle section here in saying, is that really anti-Semitism? So we're going to look at this, and I'm going to tell you without any kind of reserve, yes, it is very much anti-Semitism. All right, so that's what we're going to look at, the subtle anti-Semitism, subtle. And then we're going to talk about how Jews are feeling today as a result of the previous 2 sections. So rising anti-Semitism, subtle anti-Semitism, and then Jewish feeling. Here's the main message. The Jewish community right now is terrified. I assume it's that way in Canada. I'm speaking mainly about the community in Los Angeles, right, because that's where I live. But that community, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Jewish community here felt the same way, but the Jewish community in Los Angeles is terrified about what's happening. And they don't know what to do. They feel like they have no options. Here's your why question to think about, and this is one of the fascinating things about anti-Semitism. Why has anti-Semitism risen after Israel was attacked? Isn't that weird? Right? It's the only kind, as I've said before, it's the only kind of racial hatred in which, no matter what, that the Jews get characterized as everything bad. Right? Characterized as rich and as poor. Capitalists, one of the ones that I always thought was the weirdest was in World War II. Hitler talked about the Jews, and you could never tell which word he was going to use. Sometimes he would call them the capitalists, and other times he'd call them the communists, or the Bolsheviks, right? And you're kind of like, well, which are they, right? Like, you can't be a capitalist communist. That's not going to work. But that's what anti-Semitism does, right? It morphs, and that's what makes it so dangerous, because this makes no sense. Why does anti-Semitism rise when Israel's the victim? What? So, just think about that as we go through. Okay, so let's talk about anti-Semitism on the rise. We're actually going to back up a little bit. I do a lot of work with the Anti-Defamation League, so I'm going to use some stats from them. This is what they call the heat map. So I don't know if you're aware of the Anti-Defamation League, but they originally were founded as a Jewish group in the early 1900s in order to stop, they're called the Anti-Defamation League, to stop the defamation of the Jewish people. Right? That's their mission statement. To stop the defamation of the Jewish people. And so what they do is when a Jew is assaulted, when there's any kind of anti-Jewish rhetoric or whatnot, that often gets reported to the Anti-Defamation League. And they then are the ones who try and trace it out, try and figure out what's going on. They're involved with a lot of the threats against synagogues, all of that sort of thing. So their stats are very good. What you're looking at here, you might notice, is nothing. Right? This is a chart of nothing. Okay, now that's important to note because, I don't know if you can see the year. The year is 2015. Over here is the chart. Right here is a bar graph. It says 0 total incidents in 2015. So, 2015, no anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. That's impressive, right? That's pretty good. So, none. Now, if you were to click on some of these other ones, you might notice at the bottom there's different options, right? So they have like white supremacist events, extremist murders, terrorist plots and attacks. They have this thing, covers all of those. So if you were to click on that, you'd see a few pop up. But for 2015, there was nothing as far as anti-Semitism goes, or anti-Semitic events. Well, if you go then to 2016, you'll notice there's suddenly 1,267. So that works out to a few a day, right, in the United States. 1,267. Now, there's a lot of questions as to exactly why this is happening. Nobody really knows why it jumped in 2016. And the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League suggested that white supremacists felt much more open to voice their feelings after Trump's election, right? I'm not going to get into that anymore. I'm not telling you what I think. Right? That's just what he says. That's the CEO analyzing this data. That was his feeling. Okay, whatever it was, right, it continues even after Trump's not in office. So take a look at this. If you then say, okay, let's add all these other rows to the chart up through 2022, right? So you get 1,267 in 2016. It jumps up to 1986, 2017, and then stays about the same through 2020, which is pretty amazing, right? Considering that 2020, most people stayed in their houses, right? But then 2021, it jumps to 2,717. And 2022 was the worst year on record, 3,698. So, it doesn't appear, maybe it starts during Trump's terms, right? But when Biden's in office, right, it's jumping real high. So what's going on? Right? It doesn't seem to be necessarily connected to a political party, at least in the United States. So what is happening? Well, I also just want to give you some ideas on what these things are. What are these things that are classified as anti-Semitic incidents? So here they are. Right? Some of these you might look at and say, oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. So number one is a student-run Instagram account associated with a middle school, okay, get that in your mind. Middle school posted an Instagram story of a swastika. When asked about it by a peer, the response was, "'Cause we are Nazis." Okay, that's messed up, right? We're talking 12-year-olds. Here's another one. A Jewish institution received a phone call in which the caller said, quote, "Where can I get 6 million pizzas with foreskins? Do you drink Aryan blood? Do you eat children's foreskins and Heil Hitler?" Another one. Goyim Defense League, an anti-Semitic group, distributed propaganda that read, "Every single aspect of the slave trade was Jewish," and Kanye 2024, DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. Okay, and that's a reference to Kanye West when he made that tweet, right? He said, "I'm going to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people." We actually had in Los Angeles, we had people who heard that about that tweet, right? And they hung banners from our major freeway, from the 5 freeway, which is the one that goes from Los Angeles actually San Diego, all the way up to the Canadian border, right? And they hung banners that said, Kanye was right about the Jews. And so everybody was seeing this as they drove past. So, these are the kind of things that were happening in 2022. So that gives you an idea on the jump that took place. Now, what's happened, which is crazy, is all of a sudden, after October 7th, right, I want you to notice this. This is October 7th, and you might have been thinking, oh, well, the reason that anti-Semitism increased after October 7th was because of the Israeli response. Well, when did the Israeli response take place? Not on October 7th, right? But look at this. You will notice that this is the amount of anti-Semitism, this light blue line, this is the amount of anti-Semitism on Twitter, or X. On Twitter, it was almost zero, right? Twitter has algorithms that are supposed to remove anti-Semitism, so it was almost zero. Same thing, this dark line was Facebook, and it was removing things. Well, Facebook continues to remove it, but somehow the anti-Semites are able to figure out a way to get around Twitter's algorithms, because on October 7th, that very day, anti-Semitic tweets increased by 900%. And they continue at that level for the next week. Now, that doesn't make any sense, right? How do you see a nation being attacked and then all of a sudden say, oh, I better say really bad things about Jewish people, right? But this is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, one of the things that's really crucial to understand about it is that when you are dealing with an anti-Semite, you are dealing with somebody who is not thinking rationally about the situation, right? That's a really important piece. So anti-Semitism is not rational. It comes at things in a very emotional way, and it often oversimplifies. And so it says, look, all Jews are like this, right? There's that racism. All Jews are like this, therefore, this is how all Jews need to be treated. And this is why Jews who have nothing to do with Israel in the United States and in Canada are being attacked right now. Right? It's not like, they're doing anything that's hurting anybody, but anti-Semites are saying, aha, there's a Jewish person, they represent Israel. So you can see how that thinking works. Okay, this is a map of all the anti-Semitic incidents since October 7th. Now, this map was done early November. So it's about a month behind, right? Early November. All these green dots are anti-Semitic events. You'll see they're mostly concentrated in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. The green dots are anti-Semitic events. The light blue dots, those are harassment. So these are places where Jews are actually followed around. Things are shouted at them. They're touched, right? They're attacked. Assault, at this point there was only one. Okay. Now, I want to just note to you, this is a very important stat. In the time that between October 7th and this map, the Anti-Defamation League noted that anti-Semitic events, all these dots on here, increased from the 2022 level. Now remember, that was the highest on record, right? It increased from the 2022 level by 381% in that 1 month. 381%. So let me just give you a few examples of what this looks like. Now, the reason specifically that I'm showing you this one is because this happened where I teach. Right? So this is in Thousand Oaks, California. California professor charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of Jewish demonstrator. So here's what happened. This guy, Paul Kessler, there he is, minutes before he dies. So he's there at a street corner, which I drive through frequently. He is there at a street corner. He is holding an Israeli flag, and it was him and one other Jewish man who were there as part of the counter-protest. And there were about 75 Palestinian supporters there. So the Palestinian supporters were there. This man, Paul Kessler, walks up to them. It's murky as to exactly what happens, but somehow he gets into an altercation with one of the pro-Palestinian supporters, protesters, who happened to be a professor, if you saw that last headline. And he gets in an altercation, and it's said this hasn't been totally confirmed, but it's said that this protester takes a megaphone and hits him on the head with it. Whatever it is that happens, this altercation leads to him falling over backwards and hitting his head on the ground, right? So that takes place, and he dies a few hours later. There's where it takes place. So what you have, right, is that here is a Jewish man who's just died attending a pro-Palestinian rally. And he died holding the Israeli flag. Right? This is crazy to think of this happening in the United States, particularly in Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles has the second largest Jewish community outside of Israel in the world. The biggest one, anybody know? It's New York, yeah, that's right, it's New York. So this is insane, right? So now, just to talk about New York, here you go. New York City man indicted in Times Square anti-Semitic attack, prosecuted. He follows 4 men who are wearing kippahs, and he yells at them, they turn around, he punches them, right? They had no clue who he was, he had no clue who they were, all he knew is that they were Jewish. That was December 5th. Here's another one, Jewish man sucker punch kicked in anti-Semitic Brooklyn attack. That's December 8th. Again, this man has no clue who the guy was that was following him, he follows him, and then punches the guy, and then runs away. Here's another one, this is also Brooklyn. This is Brooklyn on December 8th, once again. Man sets fire to Jewish-Japanese fusion restaurant in Brooklyn. Police investigating as a hate crime. So there's another one for you. Here's one, again near where I live. This man and his wife were walking to Shabbat services, and they were attacked by a man with a belt, right? Like these aren't even like, it's not shooting or anything like that. It's just assaults with people's hands. So they're attacked with a guy with a belt who starts whacking them with a belt and then kicks them. They're 75 years old, right? And then says, okay, you Jew, give me your money, right? Now, what's really shocked me is in talking to the Jewish federations. Does everybody know what a Jewish federation is? So a Jewish federation is, it's sort of like the hub for the Jewish organizations in that locality. Right, so the Jewish Federation oversees like Jewish family services, social services, those kind of things. And they also just hold classes like on religion or just on Jewish culture, things like that. And it shocked me to talk to the heads of federations and to hear how many of them have had swastikas spray painted on their federation buildings. Right? This is now becoming a thing. Synagogues get swastikas regularly, federation buildings get swastikas. Here's just another thing, another aspect of what's happening. You've likely heard about the universities in the United States. Right, so this one is about the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. A protest or a march begins there in the University of Pennsylvania, and then it leads from there to a restaurant owned by an Israeli man called Goldie. Now, what they do is they march to Goldie, and they start yelling, Goldie, Goldie, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. A restaurant, right? Like, how does a restaurant commit genocide? But that's what they're doing, right? And they stand out of there, and they yell this, yell this, yell this. Well, here's what it looks like, right? This is the march. These are the things that they do as they walk along. They spray paint Free Palestine on the map at UPenn. They release smoke bombs, right? Like this is anarchy. It's craziness. They project things like this on the UPenn buildings. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, you maybe heard about this. This is Elise Stefanik. She is one of the members of Congress, and she was the one who led the congressional hearing of the 3 university presidents, right? Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT. And the reason that there was a congressional hearing was because people were hearing about this stuff, about this rally that starts on the UPenn campus and ends in front of this restaurant, yelling about genocide at a restaurant, breaking, destroying things, all of this. and they're saying this is anti-Semitism, right? So the presidents are brought in front of Congress to testify. Now, you maybe have heard about how terribly that went, right? This was the president of the University of Pennsylvania. She's not anymore. She resigned after that hearing because she did such a bad job, right? And I'll play it for you just so that you can see, get an idea on the kind of anti-Semitism that is now in universities in the United States. This is Claudine Gay. She's the president of Harvard. Now, it also appears as though she might not be the president of Harvard much longer, although not because of her testimony, even though she said the same thing as Liz McGill. She's actually now in trouble for plagiarizing her dissertation. So that's, an issue, right, for Harvard to have a president like that. So that's a whole other thing, right? So, who knows what's going to happen there. Well, I just want to show you what this hearing was like, right? Just so that you can get a sense of what Jewish students are dealing with on university campuses. So here we go.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If the
yes or no?
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Whew, that's crazy, right? Can you, how does that even happen, right? So what then Liz McGill's office, right after this gets on, and people start watching this, and they're like, what? This is the Ivy League presidents? These are the people that are supposed to be like the best of the best. What is going on? So they then have to, back up and say, oh, we didn't really understand what the question was, and, all of that. Right? So they offer these lame responses, and then she resigns the next day, right? Okay, so that's Liz McGill. This is Harvard's response. There are some who have confused a right to free expression with the idea that Harvard will condone calls for violence against Jewish students. Let me be clear, calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community or any religious or ethnic group are vile. They have no place at Harvard, and those who threaten our Jewish students will be held to account. So they come out and they say that. The problem is, how about all those anti-Semites who watched that congressional testimony? And they're like, woo! right? Look at what I can do. It's context dependent, and it doesn't actually matter until I actually commit genocide, right? Like, when it becomes conduct. Like, my goodness, that's outrageous. Okay, so that's the blatant anti-Semitism, and that's what a lot of Jews are feeling right now. Jewish students are trying to figure out, how do I go to class? Right? They've had this dream of going to an Ivy League university. They work like crazy and get accepted to these, and now they think, I'm going to die if I go to these. Right? They're trying to like put this together. Okay, now, see the sign? Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. That's a load of garbage, right? It totally is. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because Zionism is the self-determination of the Jewish people. And so if you say, I'm an anti-Zionist, what you are saying is, I have double standards. Right? Every other nation, yes, they have self-determination. Israel does not. So, that sign, outrageous. Now, but this is the subtle anti-Semitism. Right? This is what I'm talking about, where you look at that and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, anti-Zionism, well, it's not the same word, right? You know, it's probably a little different, and I can see Zionism, like, maybe that means, like, violent taking over of the land or something like that. And we get this idea that Zionism is something bad, right? In fact, the UN in 1983 condemned it as racism. They subsequently pulled that back because they recognized that was just silly, right? But this is the kind of subtlety that you start to see in anti-Semitism. Here's another one. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Right? It's cute, it rhymes. So, people hear this and they say, yeah, you know, Palestinians, they should have self-determination too, and their self-determination is from the river to the sea. And so people start chanting these things. Problem is, what river and what sea? What's the river? Jordan. What's the sea? Mediterranean, right? So that's interesting. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So from Jordan to the Mediterranean, oh, right, so that means Israel's gone. Ah, well, guess what this then requires? This is actually a call. I mean, this has genocidal implications, right? I think a lot of people who say it don't realize that. But that's what's going on. Now, this is a Palestinian historian, right? Here's what she says. This is her justification for the phrase. So I'm putting this up here so that you can hear what they say. And so that you can then say, no. So here's the argument. Simply put, the majority of Palestinians who use this phrase do so because they believe that, in 10 short words, it sums up their personal ties, their national rights, and their vision for the land they call Palestine. While attempts to police the slogan's use may come from a place of genuine concern, there's a risk that tarring the slogan as anti-Semitic, and therefore beyond the pale, taps into a longer history of attempts to silence Palestinian voices. I really don't care if it taps into a longer history, because it's a genocidal slogan, right? I mean, that's the problem. You can't just be like, oh, well, you know, it makes me feel good, so therefore I can say it. Like, that's not, it doesn't work that way. Like, it's a call for genocide. Now, Rashida Tlaib, right, Congresswoman from Michigan, you've likely heard her name, she uses this slogan. So she posted it on her Twitter account. From the river to the sea is an aspirational call for freedom, human rights, and peaceful coexistence, not death, destruction, or hate. Right. My work and advocacy is always centered in justice and dignity for all people, no matter faith or ethnicity. And I put this up because the challenge is that when you have Congress people saying this, it gets a little harder to argue with, right? However, it's important to know that Congress actually censors her over it. They say, you can't use that phrase. And so she gets like a smack on the hand from Congress, right? So that's a good thing to be aware of. Now, she doesn't respond to it, though. After getting censured, this is her response. It's a shame my colleagues are more focused on silencing me than they are on saving lives, as the death toll in Gaza surpasses 10,000. Many of them have shown me that Palestinian lives simply do not matter to them, but I still do not police their rhetoric or actions. Rather than acknowledge the voice and perspective of the only Palestinian American in Congress, my colleagues have resorted to distorting my positions in resolutions filled with obvious lies. I have repeatedly denounced the horrific targeting and killing of civilians by Hamas and the Israeli government, and have mourned the Israeli and Palestinian lives lost. But from the river to the sea, a free Palestine means a Palestine with no Israel, meaning 10 million Jews have to go somewhere. Where? Right? Are they saying push them into the sea? You know, what are they meaning? Like, this is why this is a call for genocide. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And they know it. Right? Look at this. There it is. The state of Palestine. Oh, where'd Israel go? That's interesting. And here's the comments, right? Map of Palestine from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. Right? They know that's what they're calling for. And so that's why when they make the signs, there's not an Israel. It's not, oh, yay, we'll be two states and we'll work together or something like that. It's Palestine. That's it. Right? And there it is, from the river to the sea. There it is on their shirts. Right? The whole place. There's the whole place again. So, that's the subtlety. And you're going to hear people saying that, right? And it's important to be able to say, whoa, wait. That's a genocidal slogan. Now, I want to just be clear, too. I don't use the word genocide flippantly. Right? As a scholar of genocide, it's very important for me to use that word carefully. And it is very, very carefully defined. Right? It was defined in 1947 by the UN. And so there's only a handful of specific things that can count as genocide. Right? And so what Israel is doing in Gaza, that is not genocide. But calling from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, very much fits the 1947 UN definition of genocide. Okay, now, here's an interesting group, Jewish Voice for Peace. Have any of you heard this before? Heard of them? No? Ah, okay. Now, here's what's fascinating about this to me, because Jewish Voice for Peace, you can figure out from their name, is a Jewish group, right? So, they make it sound like they can't possibly be anti-Semitic, right? We're Jews. How could we be anti-Semitic? This is actually what other groups like the Anti-Defamation League, what they term as self-loathing Jews. Now, here's why. Jewish Voice for Peace was founded in 1996. Here's the kind of stuff that they do. This is one of their shirts. Israel is a garbage country that's only loved by garbage people. It was founded on ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and settler colonialism. Its flag is a symbol of white supremacy. Right? Like, that's the kind of stuff that Jewish Voice for Peace puts on shirts. And they're like, oh, we're so excited to see everybody. Okay. They also hosted Rashida Tlaib. And notice what they call her? This hero for justice. Here's an interesting poster that they put together. L'chaim Intifada. Right? I bet you never thought you'd see that together. L'chaim means to life in Hebrew. L'chaim Intifada. That's Jewish Voice for Peace. Another one, the myth of civilian Israelis. So they're trying to say there's no such thing as an Israeli who's a civilian. So when Hamas goes in and kills 1,200 Israelis, they say good, because they're soldiers. So they try and put forth this idea that every Israeli, not just for the 2 to 3 years that they're in the IDF, right? But all of their lives are soldiers and not civilians. So they can be killed without any kind of repercussions. Right? This is a Jewish group. Isn't that crazy? But what they claim is that as a Jewish group, they love peace. Right? And they say, oh, Israel is racist because look at how it treats the Palestinians. You know, things like this. And so they try and make it appear as though they're on the side of human rights. And so in fact, when October 7th happened, this was the statement they issued. In other words, Israel deserved it. Now again, I mention this because a lot of people hear about these guys and they say, oh, but they're Jews. Right, so they must understand. You know, they must know what they're talking about. but it's anti-Semitic Jews. This is self-loathing Jews. Now, the issue is that they actually have gotten traction, right? Groups like this actually shut down one of the freeways in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. They went and stood on the freeway and said, we won't stand for genocide in Gaza. Right? And they're wearing all their, I'm Jewish and I don't support this kind of shirts. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that they do. That's the Statue of Liberty. Isn't that crazy? They all went to the Statue of Liberty, said Palestinians should be free, ceasefire, the whole world is watching, never again for anyone. They take over the Statue of Liberty. So, Jewish Voice for Peace denies Israel's right to exist, and therefore is anti-Semitic. Here's another one. Has anybody ever read this? Mondoweiss? Yeah, Tim, you've seen it before. These people are nuts, but it's Jews, right? This is also, it's not Jewish Voice for Peace, but it's another group of Jews that go around and they absolutely abhor Israel. But people will read them and they'll say, oh, well, these are Jews talking about Israel. They must know what they're saying. So let me give you an idea on how that works. Look at this. This is where they were at in terms of category rank, right? News and media publishers. So as far as news and media publishers are concerned, they were right around like 5,000, the 5,000th website in the world, right? That's not super good. Look at what happens on October 7th. They become about 1,800, right? They just jump up. Now, why does that happen? Because people say, oh, they're Jewish. They report on Israel. I want to know what's going on in Israel. Right? This is what I mean by subtle anti-Semitism. People get lured into this without realizing what it is. And then they open it up and they read headlines like this. I used to think the term Judeo-Nazis was excessive. I don't any longer. I used to think the term Judeo-Nazis was excessive. I don't any longer. In other words, the Jews are Nazis, is what he's saying. Let me just give you a taste of what this article is saying. It says, yesterday, Jerusalem's deputy mayor, Aryeh King, tweeted a photo of over 100 naked Palestinians. They weren't actually naked. This gives you an idea on what they're saying. Who were kidnapped by the Israeli military in Gaza, handcuffed and sitting in the sand, guarded by Israeli soldiers. Now, before we go on, let me ask you this. Why do you think Israeli soldiers would capture people, men, right, and have them take off their shirts? Any thoughts? Why would that be? Tim?
Make sure they're not wearing explosive vests.
Because they try to blow up the IDF soldiers, right? Kids do this too, right? This is the kind of thing that all kinds of people do. And this guy's looking at, look at the IDF. I can't believe they would treat people like that. Yeah, because they want to get blown up. I mean, it's silly, right? King wrote that, quote, the IDF is exterminating the Nazi Muslims in Gaza, and that we must up the tempo. If it were up to me, he added, I would bring 9 D9s, bulldozers, place them behind the sandy hills, and give an order to bury all those hundreds of Nazis alive. They are not human beings, and not even human animals. They are subhuman, and that is how they should be treated, King said. Okay, now, with that said, right, he's the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and he did say this. But he falls, as far as the political spectrum goes, he falls very far onto the right, right? So this is not surprising rhetoric as far as the right goes, at least at this point. You know, they're angry, right? They're frustrated with this sort of thing. He ended by repeating Netanyahu's biblical Amalek genocidal reference. Eradicate the memory of Amalek, we will not forget. Now, keep in mind, do you notice what they call these guys? 100 naked Palestinians, right? They don't say 100 people that Israel figured was Hamas, right? And they don't note that after Israel checks them, the ones that they determine are not Hamas are allowed to go. So he goes on, and his whole thing, this is just, see if you can note the anti-Semitism here. His entire post is based off of a tweet by the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. Now, do you remember what the post was called? What this news article was called? It was called, I used to think that the term Judeo-Nazis was excessive. I don't any longer. Now, what's the issue with reading a tweet from the deputy mayor of Jerusalem and deciding that all Jews are Nazis? What's the problem with that? The problem is that that's just outrageous. Who would do that? right? It's like you say, oh, you know, I talked to one Canadian and they said this to me, therefore, all Canadians are like that, right? Like, that, it just doesn't even make any sense. It's not like the deputy mayor of Jerusalem even has any power to send bulldozers or do any of those kind of things, right? Like, he can't even do that. And yet, this is the kind of stuff that people are now reading more and more and more. So when you come across something like this, what I would suggest is, number one, note its opinion, right? So that's a key thing to note. And then actually go to the site and read what it is. Because legit sources will actually tell you these are our journalistic standards. Right? These are what we adhere to. Here's what they say. See if this sounds sketchy. Mondoweiss is an independent website devoted to informing readers about developments in Israel-Palestine and related U.S. foreign policy. We provide news and analysis unavailable through the mainstream media regarding the struggle for Palestinian human rights. Now, as soon as I hear that it's unavailable other places, that very much sounds like, oh, why? Why is it unavailable? Because, like, you just made it up? Or something? Like, you know, what's the deal there? Like, it's not like these other mainstream news places don't have journalists that could get to the same places that you go to, right? So it's very odd. So that's the first thing. Now, when they go through, right, they talk more about that. This is their only paragraph dedicated to explaining their journalistic standards. Now, just to give you a comparison, the Washington Post has something like 50 paragraphs explaining its journalistic standards, right? This is theirs. We select content for the site on the basis of our shared commitment to news professionalism, as well as justice for Palestinians. Oh, okay. So you're not biased at all. We do not have a single editorial position on specific issues, but aim to build a diverse online community with special focus on viewpoints generally ignored by large media outlets. Right? That's their whole journalistic standards. There are no standards. It's just, we write about what we think will advance the Palestinian cause. Right? This is anti-Semitism, once again. You know, you can't come on and call Jews Nazis. And by the way, this is their store. So there you go. Okay, now just to wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about how American Jews are feeling. And again, I assume that this is probably similar in Canada. These are some of the quotes that American Jews have said. In reality, this is such a complicated issue. You need to educate yourself before you speak up on a sensitive subject. I refuse to be ashamed of my Judaism. A lot of Jewish teens are going through a lot of different emotions right now. Ignoring it makes my Jewish peers and me feel alone. It's really making me feel like our world has gone horribly wrong. So these are some of the feelings that Jewish young people are feeling at the moment. Now, I want to just tell you about one of the experiences that I had and that helped me understand what the Jewish community is going through. This is one of the rabbis in Thousand Oaks. And that's the area where that man, Paul Kessler, was killed. This is one of the rabbis. He sent out an email. I received it from him. I'm part of this group with him where we try and get Jews and Christians together. So he sends it and he says, "Friends, our community is struggling on many levels. Most recently with the loss of Paul Kessler, who was killed as a result of an altercation at a recent rally. In these moments of anger, pain, and adversity, we recognize the paramount importance of coming together to support one another and peacefully bridge our differences. Rabbi Ari Everbach, Paul Kessler's rabbi from Temple Etz Chaim, so there's two temples in Thousand Oaks. One's conservative, one's reform. He went to the conservative one. Along with Temple Adat Elohim, that's this guy's temple, and Temple B'nai Tzedek, which was actually a mistake, are joining for a vigil, calling us together as a community and standing against hatred. Vigil will take place. So he says, we'd be honored if you'd be able to attend. So I said, okay, sure, I'll attend. And it'd be interesting to see. So that's actually me. And yes, I am wearing a yarmulke, because you have to when you go into a conservative synagogue. So, and I know you'll say, well, what about him? Why is he not wearing? Well, okay, you have to if you want people to like you. All right. Now, one of the weirdest things that I had happen is, I told you that I do work with the Anti-Defamation League. So when I walked in, the people there said, oh, it's you. You're a VIP. Sit here with all the politicians. That was one of the weirdest things. So this is one of the state senators of California, and this is one of the state assembly members. So I sat there with them, which was real strange. But it was a very interesting experience because it opened up to me the feelings that the Jewish community is having right now. It was crazy to hear what they were saying. So after I heard this and heard about how alone they were feeling, I decided to reach out to some of my Jewish students And I want to just read to you an email that I got in response. I wrote a very, very short email. It was, wow, I just heard about Paul Kessler. I went to the vigil for him, and I didn't realize what your community is going through. Are you okay? That was all that I said. And I got this. Jason, I can't tell you how much your email meant to us. You are the only non-Jewish friend that has contacted us to see how we are doing. This is on November 15th. You and your family are truly special. When you teach the course, I told them that I was going to do a course on Israel and Gaza. Please let us know. It's sad to see how people, we, the Jewish community, have supported up until now. He's talking about BLM. Have either abandoned us or even taken the side of Hamas or supported other anti-Semitic tropes. We value your friendship greatly. As Golda Meir once said about going to war, what choice do we have? There's a great sense of isolation and fear in our community. Only one church in all the West Valley reached out to our temple to show support. As I said, your email means so much to us. Bless you, Ruth, and your family. Right? Like, that was not what I expected to get in response. I thought it would be something like, well, we're doing okay, but it's hard. But to get this email saying, this means so much to us because we didn't realize anybody cared. And I think that that's so important for us as those who see ourselves as part of the same olive tree with the Jews, right? To know how they're feeling at this moment. So, as a result, he said only one church reached out to our temple. As a result, our ecclesia wrote a letter to their temple. Here's what we said. Dear Temple Judea, after the shattering events of October 7th and all the aftermath of that attack that has been felt in this country, our church wanted to write to you to express our sympathy and extend our friendship. As biblical Christians, we firmly believe in the promises that the Almighty made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We recognize that he has a special relationship with the Jewish people. Even in the Christian scriptures, the message of Jesus is referred to as the hope of Israel. We believe in the hope of Israel. We are grateful to share the community with your temple and want to emphatically state our sympathy to your congregation, recognizing that despite our differences, we are all created in the image of God. Our prayer is for conflict to cease, for peace to be upon Jerusalem, and for the day when all the world knows of the Lord's goodness. It is with gratefulness to all that the Almighty has done over the centuries in continuing to guide and bless the Jewish people that we state, along with you, Am Yisrael Chai, which means the people of Israel live. At this time, when the darkness is so palpable and haunting, even in a country like this, which so often has been a haven for the Jewish people, may you feel that comfort promised by the prophet, comfort, comfort my people. We write these words praying the Almighty will give you all that you might need at this time. In the hope of Israel, the arranging board of the Simi Hills Christadelphian Division. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to do. I think Jews need to hear from us. I think they need to hear that there are Christians who know that the Bible teaches the hope of Israel. They need to hear that there are Christians who recognize that God has blessed Abraham and will continue to bless the people of Abraham. Right? They need to hear this. They need to hear that there are people who still read the Bible and recognize its message. Because right now, they're terrified. Jews are taking down their mezuzahs. Does anyone know what mezuzahs are? They're the little things that they put on all their doorposts, right? It's from Deuteronomy 6. Write these words on your doorposts, right? So they put them on their doorposts and they touch them as they walk by. Well, that clearly identifies a house as Jewish. They're taking them down. Jews were afraid during Hanukkah to put menorahs in their windows, right? Because they felt like, if we do this, is a brick going to come through the window? This is an opinion piece in Newsweek. Listen to this. I survived the Holocaust. It's starting to feel like the 1930s again. Just before I left, I went to an event. Well, I'll tell you that after I read this. This is in the Jerusalem Post. Diaspora Jewry's days are over. All Jews must move to Israel for safety. This is the kind of thing that people are feeling, right? That Jewish couple that emailed us, or that I emailed and they emailed back, they said, we had always planned to move to Israel when this happened, but now we don't know what to do. Israel's at war. Right? But this is what people are thinking about. They're thinking, how do we leave this country? Now, I went to an event hosted by the Anti-Defamation League, and one of the higher-up leaders of the Anti-Defamation League gave the talk. And she said, it's like the 1930s all over again. That's what we see. And I say that, not to be alarmist, but I say that because I don't think we have a sense of what the Jewish community is feeling. Remember this. In our classes, we talked about how the Jews in Germany were the most assimilated Jews. They were the most accepted Jewish community in the world. And look at what happened. And that's what all the Jews right now are thinking about. They are saying, what's the most assimilated Jewish community? The United States. And they're saying, is this going to be the next Germany? So they're trying to figure out, what do they do? So I would suggest to you that now is the time. Now is the time for us who know biblical truth, who know that Jesus was Jewish, surprisingly a lot of people don't, and who recognize that one day all Israel shall be saved. It's time. We need to reach out to the Jews we know. We need to tell them, this is what we know from Scripture. And we just want you to know, you aren't alone.